Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. All right, so welcome everyone. Things are going to be a little weird at first because we're still letting people in. So as I said, you've probably every one of us has been on Zoom for a while. So we probably have this down pat, but there's a little bit of information just in case you need it. So I'll leave that up just for the time being.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. All right. And I'm assuming everybody can hear me all right. My internet connection is a little unstable, so I may need to repeat things as we go along. But welcome everyone and happy Earth Day. So I'm so glad to be able to share this day with you. And even though we're meeting virtually, I do want to acknowledge that most of us are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And from a forager's perspective, we owe a great debt to the First Nations people for keeping the botanical knowledge alive and passing it down from generation to generation. So wherever you are in Ottawa today, just please take a moment and acknowledge that, that history that we all share with the First Peoples. So this is a presentation about urban foraging, and I'm doing this on behalf of the Hampton-Iona Group, Community Group, pardon me. They are the community association for the Hampton-Iona area, and they've been around for a long, long time, and they've been a great partner with Friends of Hampton Park, which I started a few years ago. Just a really good supporter. If you are in the neighborhood, I would definitely encourage you to get in touch with them and to possibly become a member. So we'll include some contact information at the end, and the president and vice president are on the call tonight, so they may have a bit of information to share about their AGM at a later date. Our moderator is Erica Kish from Friends of Carlington Hill. And Erica's got a couple of roles for me tonight. First of all, she's going to keep me on time because I'm going to present about an hour's worth of material, and then you'll have at least 20 minutes for a discussion and some questions. So if you've got questions on particular plants, please just put them in the chat at any point, and Erica will moderate those and we'll save those up for the end. If my connection is a little unstable and I need to repeat something because something, lags, or I'm talking too fast, send a little note to Erica in the chat or raise your hand and we'll deal with it as we come. But most questions we're going to save until the end. So just a bit of background on me. I am an environmental researcher and writer. I've been doing that for about 25 years. I don't have a science degree. I am primarily self-taught, but I have taken courses in foraging and naturalists, and I keep up to date on all of that sort of thing. So many of you wonder, what the heck is foraging anyway? You just running around outside digging up plants? No, not really. You have to do some homework. But the general idea is to identify the plants that we just see in our everyday environment. And for us, that's a city. Pardon me. So I only promote, ethical and sustainable foraging. My idea is that we have to consider these plants in their own right and in their roles before we're going to start seeing what they might be able to do for us. We have to know what their role is in the ecosystem, whether if they're an invasive plant, if they're a native plant, if they're providing food, wildlife, what sort of ecological services are they providing? I also encourage people to really look close to home because foraging should be highly localized. And it's really practical because you can also keep an eye on your plants a lot easier if they're closer to home. You're not going to be driving 25 kilometers every single day to watch a plant's growth cycle. So again, keep it simple, keep it close to home. So just to get you started, that's what urban foraging is all about. So with the Zoom link, I sent along a guide that I prepared a few years ago called Every Lawn a Salad Bar. Much of the information that is in this presentation, you will find in the guide. So a lot of the background information, a lot of the really, first steps that you need to take a look at that if you haven't already. It's free, use it as your own guide. So today we're not going to be giving you a botany lesson. I'm not going to be throwing out Latin terms. I'm going to be emphasizing how you identify these plants by sight, sometimes by smell, and sometimes by feel. We're going to look at some of the best plants to harvest in this area and when, and some of the uses that I've definitely found, and I'm sure you'll find more uses for if you go along. So there's no need to really take notes. You can take some screenshots if you'd like, but it will be recorded, and we'll put the link up for the webinar later before the end of the month. So again, for me, foraging is as much of a mindset as it is a practice. So for me, you have to appreciate those plants first. These are some of the things that I've learned over the years of foraging. And if anybody knows me personally, they know I'm high energy. I normally speak a mile a minute, and foraging really slows me down. So that's why I like it, because it's taught me some patience. It's taught me to look very closely at things. It's taught me an appreciation for other things other than plants, the birds, the insects, other species that I can't even eat. You want to know these things, and the only way to do that is to take your time. Until there's a Vulcan mind meld, you have to do things one at a time. And when you go slow, that helps you also narrow down maybe some of the plants you're going to want to take a little second glance at, ones you like, ones that you're interested in. Not every plant is going to taste good to you, so don't feel that you need to, go out and eat everything. This is not a grocery store. We have that luxury. Plants can't get up and run away from us, but we can go to a store. And really check your expectations. Most people think they're going to find the next great endangered plant, or they're going to find wild garlic and leeks. But your best sources actually are the everyday, sort of boring, what people call weeds. Standard disclaimer here, because this webinar is for information purposes only, and your health and your safety is your responsibility. So you have to do your homework when it comes to any plant. Anyone can have an allergic reaction to a plant, even people who don't think that they have allergies. So there are some health resources included in the guide, as well as other identification resources. But again, it is your responsibility. And I'll give you some tips on what sorts of sources you will want to look for as you go along. So that brings us into, nicely, the rules of foraging. And there's quite a number of them if you want to be an ethical and sustainable forager. And there is a long list in the guide that's included. I just want to go through a few of them right now. The very first, most important one is you need to have a 100% identification of whatever plant you plan to eat or serve to somebody else. So I always say, if it's ever any doubt in your mind, don't put it in your mouth. Leave it for that day. Take as many photographs as you need to before you identify it, before you do anything with it. Clean greens means basically you want healthy soil. You want it growing in healthy environment, clean water, clean soil. And that can be tricky to ascertain. So a few guidelines. You never want to harvest anywhere close to busy roads. So the Carling Avenues of the world, the baselines of the world. No. You're never going to anywhere along those verges. The Queensway, lots of lovely plants and trees and grass growing all there. Great for identifying plants, but not for eating, just because of the amount of chemicals, particulate matter that's coming off of those highways. Hydrocuts should also be looked upon with some suspicion, because in the earlier mid-1950s, 60s, a lot of utility companies did use herbicides and defoliants to clear these corridors. And some of those chemicals don't biodegrade, they're still in the soil. So you need to be a little careful about those. I would just take those off your list entirely. Don't be greedy. So again, if you go out and you just decide to pick everything in sight, you're not leaving anything for healthy plant regrowth, you're not leaving anything for food and wildlife, and you may end up just wasting your time because you may get it home, you toss it in the fridge and you've forgotten about it, and 3 days later, it's gone bad. So you also need to sort of plan to be able to do the processing that you might need to do, depending on what it is that you're picking. Because most of these plants, they're wild. They haven't been bred to have a long shelf life. You need to use them quite quickly. So lots of places where you can't forage. Where actually can you forage? You'd be very, very surprised when you walk out your front door. You might find about 5 or 6 things that you could probably eat right off the bat. So start taking a look into your own yards, your neighbors' yards, their backyards. If you're a member of a church, a lot of churchyards have lots of greenery and landscaping around, could be good places. Community center grounds, schoolyards, abandoned homes, and sometimes redevelopments. Sometimes a home is slated to be demolished, and maybe you know the owner, they're moving. You can go in, possibly take out what you want, maybe even transplant certain plants. Anytime you want to do that, you are always wanting to seek the permission of the owner of the property, or at least the owner's representative. I've never had anybody turn me down. If you're polite, if you explain what you're doing, most people are perfectly happy to let you on their property. I will say it is illegal to forage on any federal land and in provincial parks and most city parks. And there are some very good reasons for that. Number one, there are some bad foragers out there who will go in and just make a mess of things. People who just don't know what they're doing. But these places are really ideal for the first time forager, because what you need to do is go in and identify plants before you eat them. So these are really good spots to go and see a whole bunch of plants in one area. So use them as your classroom, not your grocery store. You don't need a lot of materials to get started. Really and truly, something to carry your bounty home with and something to cut it with. So that could even just be your fingers or a knife or pruners. Try to avoid plastic because it can build up moisture. And a lot of the plants that we're going to be talking about tonight are leafy greens, and leafy greens don't like moisture. They like air circulation. So use a paper bag or a box or an open basket. Any instruments you do use for cutting, keep them clean and sharp, including fingers, because sometimes you may be ending up using your fingers. If you're cutting more than one plant in a single day, you want to be able to clean your tools in between. So if you're in the field, have a rag with you, maybe a wet wipe that you can clean them in between. There's very little chance that you might spread a disease, but the chance is there, and you do not want to be doing any harm while you're doing this. And just a few other tips you might want to bring along: a camera, a reference book, extra bags for litter. You're always going to find trash. And a few tips on taking photographs of plants when you first start to identify them. I don't know how many times I took a photograph of a plant, took it home. It's not good enough for iNaturalist to identify. And then I've forgotten where it was because I didn't take a wide shot. So it's like, oh dear. Was I in Hampton? Was I in Carlington? Was I down by the river? I don't remember, and I'm not good with geographic coordinates on my digital photographs. Photos are also really good to remind you of the kind of habitat that a plant is in. Is it full sun? Is it shade? Is it close to water? What other plants are growing nearby? A few general notes, excuse me. Again, most of the plants we're looking at tonight are going to be leafy greens. So these are just a few general guidelines to go through. The guide that the Every Lawn a Salad bar has this in a bit more detail, but generally speaking, if you're going to eat these plants raw, you want to pick them early when they're nice and young and tender, early in the morning too, after the dew is evaporated. you want plants that are dry. Most of these plants are going to be a lot stronger in flavor, maybe a little bit more bitter than you're used to. And there's an easy way to get rid of that. Use acid-based dressings or soak them in cold water. And again, cooking usually removes most of this bitterness. And for people who use green powders in smoothies or other dishes, some of these greens can actually be dried as well. Or rather, all of these greens can be dried. So now we're going to get to the really good stuff, and we're on track for time. So we're going to start looking at the actual plants. So I chose these plants to look at tonight. Number one, because these are all plants I've used for years. I've had no ill effects. I've served these to other people without ill effects. And the other nice thing is these are all plants that are in places like Hampton Park and Carlington. So again, you can go to one spot and sort of do your homework all on a bunch of plants in one little area. I've divided them up between native, naturalized, and invasive. Now, some of these, some naturalized plants, they behave like natives because they've been around a long time. And that's what we mean by naturalized. So the dandelion, for instance, was brought over with the first European settlers. There are some native species of dandelions, but the ones that we see are the ones that were brought over 500 years ago. So now you see a dandelion, it doesn't necessarily take over an entire yard. It works with other plants. So it has become more naturalized to our environment. And then, of course, there are the invasives, garlic mustard, goutweed, Japanese knotweed that we'll be looking at tonight. These are plants that were brought in usually for ornamental purposes. In the case of goutweed and Japanese knotweed, they were brought in as ornamental plants and they escaped. They've just gotten out of control. And because they're newer plants, they have not acclimatized as much. Our native species are not used to them and they're doing real harm. So if we can get them out by eating them, so much the better. Does anybody have any questions yet before we start getting into the plants themselves? Is everybody hearing me okay and doing all right? I'll take silence as a good sign. All right. So we're going to start off with the dandelion because it's a dandelion and it's lovely. And anyone who calls this a weed doesn't know what they're talking about. A weed is just a plant with bad PR as far as I'm concerned. And the dandelion is a great place to start because every single part of the plant is edible. It has absolutely no poisonous lookalikes. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts you've already eaten one. Whether you were a kid picking the flower or maybe you've had the leaves in a salad, we're probably all really familiar with it. So it's a good one to sort of start looking at when you're identifying plants right off the bat. So even though we know what it looks like, we're going to go through the parts of the plant. So what you're looking for, obviously, with a dandelion, and they do vary a little bit in size, obviously, and the width of the leaf. But generally speaking, the leaves are nice and smooth. They have that nice big central vein that goes down it. And then they have these little backward pointing lobes, they're called, along the leaves. And they point backwards towards the base. And if you can see this photograph down here at the bottom, the dandelion comes up in a rosette base. And if you think about a rose in your mind and how the petals overlap, that's how the leaves overlap in that rosette base. So the next time you come across a dandelion, take a look right down into the middle of it and you'll see what I mean there. And of course, the dandelion can be found in virtually all open areas. It loves lawns, disturbed lands. It's one of the first plants to come back, in a new development. You'll find it pretty much everywhere. It doesn't like to be in the woods, obviously not. And there's no medical concerns with this one at all, for the most part. In fact, there's more research probably on the dandelion than any plant I know. The medical research on dandelions is quite startling when you start looking at it. Up close and personal with the dandelion, we have the bud comes out and they're flowering now, so you can see these. The only part of the dandelion that's not really that tasty are these little leaflets that come out around the flower bud, and those are called bracts. So if you're going to use the flower or the bud, you want to remove those little ones, and you can just pick those off with your fingers. I've known people who have pickled these little buds for capers. I've never tried that. Normally I just chop them up and toss them into a stir fry. And a lot of times I just eat the dandelions, but I know people who make tea, they make a simple syrup out of it. You can make wine out of it as well. And a lot of people swear by dandelion tea, which is taken from the taproot for the most part. Now the dandelion taproot can be really a bit sneaky, because the size of the dandelion on top may not indicate how big the taproot is. So if you're into digging up roots, these can sometimes fool you. And because if they're small, sometimes they're very, very skinny, they may not be worth your while. So if you want to try something like dandelion root tea, you may be better off going to the natural health store. Generally speaking, you can use dandelions in stews, in salads, in sauces, all sorts of things. Anywhere you would use spinach, you can use those dandelion leaves. The next plant that we're going to take a look at, oops, pardon me, I forgot a few lookalikes. Now, the nice thing about the dandelion is there are no poisonous lookalikes, but these are two that sort of look like it. The first one is hairy cat's ear. You can probably figure out that its leaves are hairy. And you can also see that it has multiple flowers per stem, whereas the dandelion only has one. The other one that looks a little similar on the flower side is the sow thistle. I always have trouble saying that one. Multiple flowers again, which is different from the dandelion, and the leaves have those little prickly parts on their lobes. So again, fairly easy to distinguish that from the dandelion. Daylilies, another one where the entire plant is edible, but there are some concerns here. Because the daylily, or the tiger lily, as a lot of people call it, there's a lot of lilies that look the same. So you need to be a little bit more careful with this one than you would about a dandelion. So when we're looking at the daylily, take a look at those nice long leaves, nice long lance-shaped leaves, and that really nice orange flower. The flower will change, the hue can be a little bit, it can go from yellow to a more reddish, but generally speaking, it is that nice bright sort of orange of a tiger. Again, this is a plant that likes open sun, fields. You'll find this along a lot of people's fence lines and hedgerows. They can spread, they can be aggressive, but they can spread quite rapidly, and they can escape into all sorts of places. This is a nice way to identify. If you can't find them right now, later on in like winter and in the late fall, you see, and even now, even sometimes in the spring, when these big stalks, these big old flower stalks haven't gone down yet, you'll still notice this. Just give me 1 second. I've got two people in the waiting room. Erica, if you could admit those two for me. Thanks. I'm just going to go on to the next slide a little bit. Oh, wait. So the part that you want to be taking out at this time of the year, oh, pardon me, is the shoot. So if you're looking around for daylilies now, this is what they're looking like right now. These young shoots, they almost look like leeks in a way that they sort of overlap their inner leaves, like a leek does. They sort of roll into themselves. And these things are really, really nice to eat at this time of year. They're very crunchy. I'm usually jonesing for anything fresh that's been, that I can get at this time of year. And this really fits the bill. Chop these up, put them in a stir fry or a salad. they're not a big flavor. They don't have a strong flavor. They're very light. You'd almost not know that they're there. I take them for the crunch. And it's a nice, like I said, a nice, fresh, watery, crunchy flavor. So great plant to eat this time of year. Few weeks from now, you're going to start seeing the flower buds come up. And they can have as many as like 10 per spike. So if we go back to that earlier photograph, this is the old flower spike. And this is the new flower spike coming up with all of the little buds on them. So these buds here are also edible, and you can pick those off. I usually only take a few per head, because you do want to leave enough, again, for regrowth. And also lilies can be a bit of a laxative, have laxative properties. So if you eat too much of these, they can do a bit of a number on your system. So again, you want to be looking out for those kinds of medical issues that may have an interaction with any of your own personal medical issues or conditions. The corm, the little tubers, they spread out, as you can see down here. So there's a root system and then these little tubers here. And some people say they're similar in flavor to a Jerusalem artichoke. I find that the texture is a lot like a water chestnut. So it's a starchy vegetable, and it can be used similar to a new potato. So you want to scrub them very well. They can be boiled, they can be roasted. Again, these can be very small and fiddly. So if you have the time, great. If not, I would concentrate on the above parts of the plant. So only the shoots at this time of year. The leaves are not edible for the most part once they're too big. The buds are edible and the flowers are as well. If you take a look at this photograph down at the bottom, those are daylily flowers that I stuffed with some herbed cream cheese, twisted them up using just a couple of toothpicks, and you actually use the little stem of the flower as the holder. So you don't even have to use utensils for this little appetizer. You can batter the buds, as we see here. These buds have been frittered and fried. And it's also really good to chuck into a pesto. So pesto doesn't have to just be basil. Pesto is basically ground greens. So I make a lot of pesto out of all the wild greens that I make. It's one of the best ways to use these things because then you have an all-purpose sauce ready to go. You can pop it into rice, into pasta. You know, there's just so many things that you can do with a pesto. So that is the daylily. Let me just say one more thing about lilies, and not human health, but cat health, because all lilies are poisonous to cats. And I have cats, and one of them may actually have been poisoned by a lily many, many years ago. He wasn't that bright. Most cats are pretty smart, and they don't nibble on them. But if you have nibbling cats and they go outside, or you've got lilies inside the house, you want to be a little bit careful because even the pollen can be poisonous to cats. As I said, don't want to scare you. I have a peace lily in my house and my cats are fine. They don't nibble on it. The first plant that I'm really concerned about that I'm presenting tonight is the Fiddlehead Fern, also known as the Ostrich Fern. It is a native plant. And ferns are among the oldest groups of plants on the planet. They've been with us from day one. They're always found in forested areas. This is a shade-loving plant. It likes moisture. It usually needs to be near a water source of some imagining. The best way to identify these is its size. This is the biggest fern you're going to find in this area. Lots of little ferns we have such a ton of them, lady ferns, sensitive ferns, oak ferns, but ostrich ferns are enormous. The big plumes, these big fronds, they can grow 1.5 meters long. They are just huge. You cannot miss these things. But the fiddlehead also can be over harvested and has been. So again, that's another reason why there's rules around federal lands, provincial parks, city parks about not picking these things. Another good reason to be very wary sometimes of an ostrich fern is there can be bacteria buildup in the fiddleheads, which is the only edible part. So we're going to take a look at, talk a little bit about that concern in a minute, but just to get us started on how to identify the ostrich fern. So like all ferns, they come up from a crown like this. So they come up out of the ground with this sort of crown, and then the buds, the fiddleheads appear. So this is a sturdier portion of the plant that supports the fiddleheads as they're growing up. And you'll see now these little heads are coming up. Some of them have already popped, and there's always that little brown papering, that sort of little brown packaging around it. Later on in the year, even in the wintertime, you're going to be able to see these long, mature stalks. When they turn brown, they stick up out of the snow like gray hair out of a dark-haired head, right? I know, because that happened to me. Those couple of good ways to identify this one. Again, it is the biggest fern. When you are harvesting the fiddleheads, and we may only have a week or two to do this if you can even find them on property that you can harvest them from. When you do find them, you want to be very careful. First of all, you want to see how many heads each plant has. If it has less than about 5, leave that plant alone. I only go for the strongest plants, the 8 or 9 fiddlehead plants, and out of those, I would maybe take 2 or 3. So less than half, usually even less than a third per plant. You want to leave enough for regrowth and for, habitat wildlife. The problem with fiddleheads is, as you can see, these heads are incredibly tight and bacteria can build up in there. So any bacteria that might have been in the soil can also be in the fiddlehead. So when you're cleaning them, first of all, you've got to pick all that little papery stuff off. I find a toothbrush works very well. A lot of guides, when you're starting to look at foraged plants, they're going to tell you you need to boil fiddleheads for 15 minutes. And I think if you're going to boil a fiddlehead for 15 minutes, you may as well not bother eating it. So very, very careful to have very clean source of fiddleheads. Hampton Park, even though, I know people forage in there, even though they're not supposed to, I would not take a fiddlehead out of there simply because the population has increased. There's more dogs, cannot vouch for the health of the soil as much. Getting back to the actual preparation of them. So if you know you have a clean source, clean them very well, pop them into some boiling water. The water will turn a little brownish because that paper that's still in those heads is right tight in those little heads. And that's going to start coming out. You want to blanch them once, take them out, blanch them again until the water goes clear. And it may not be 15 minutes, it may only be 5. Use a judgment, but people have gotten sick from fiddleheads, and it's mainly from mispreparing them. So this is one you need to be a little careful of. Here's a really good example of bad foraging on our left. And this was a shot that I took a couple of years ago in Hampton Park. As you can see, someone has come along and beheaded all the plants. I've actually gone back into this actual area this year, and some of these plants are not coming back. There's whole areas where they're not. So this is a big, big no-no versus the picture on the right, which is my own backyard. And the inset, you can see that I took out 2 out of this plant. And then later on in the year, I took a photograph, and obviously it is doing very well and it's still growing. And I enjoyed my fiddlehead that year. So I have about 20 fiddleheads in my backyard, and that's enough for a springtime treat, and a little bit left over to toss into either pesto or even freeze for a later dish. Moving on to our very first of the invasives, which is the garlic mustard. This is This is not as bad as some, but it can be a little bugger. The nice thing is it really does taste like garlic and it smells like garlic. So one of the first ways you can use to identify that is by crushing a leaf, rub it between your hands and smell it. If you will get a little bit of garlic, it's not going to be like, you know, tearing apart a nice clove of garlic and getting that big smell. It's going to be very mild. So again, that's a nice one to throw into a salad or a pesto. This is found in a range of places, from disturbed soils, gardens. I found this in my garden first, and I was ripping it out left, right, and center 20 years ago. And then I realized, oh dear, I should be eating this. So I now eat it. The best way to identify it at this time is through the leaves. So this is a biennial plant, which means it has a 2-year growth cycle. The first year plants are going to be fairly small and they're a little bit lighter in color. The leaves are sort of more rounded and scalloped, as you can see, with these sort of scalloped edges. In the second year, they're going to flower. And the leaves will take on a bit of a different shape. They'll become a little bit more triangular. They'll sort of elongate down, and they change to this sort of nice purplish color. They also flower. Let's bring that one up. So here's a nice close-up of the leaf and the flower. So these little flowers, they have 4 petals each. Is it 4? Yes, it's 4 petals each. And then they produce the little seed pods, and you can see them starting to come up. And the seed pods look like that. And again, these seeds can be gathered, and you can grind these as a spice. You really can't overharvest this plant. If you have it on your property and you don't want it to spread, dig it up. This is a plant that if you can probably keep it in a weed box or a container, if you wanted to have some on hand. You do not want to transplant this into your yard. It will spread and your neighbors will hate you. So this is a plant that you could probably keep controlled in a pot, but not in your yard. Next one up we're going to look at, and you probably noticed these ones. So they kind of look like these little weird aliens on the landscape come late summer. You see these big brown seed heads all over the place. This photograph was taken down along the Ottawa River, and dock is just everywhere down along the Ottawa River. So there's a lot of different kinds of dock, but I'm going to look mostly at the curly dock because it's one of the easiest ones to look at, and there's a lot of it. This is another one you can't really over harvest. So the curly dock, when it first comes up, it comes up straight out of the oh, pardon me, the ground like this, with the base and the nice long leaves. They're fairly narrow, with a nice big vein down the center. And as they get older, they become, as you can see over here, they become more lance-shaped and a little bit straighter. And the leaves decrease the farther up the stalk as it gets older. So there'll be fewer leaves at the top than there will be at the bottom. The leaves are good to eat up until the flower spikes start to appear. They're going to be tastiest then. You can use them afterwards, but I would, either dry them or cook them. They're really not great afterwards. It's a huge plant. It can grow over 1 meter or 2 meters high, very easy to spot. What I use it for primarily is the seeds, and we'll get to that in a second. So this is not like burdock. A lot of people think dock, they automatically think it's a relative of burdock, which is those things that get in your hair and on your socks, and they get stuck in your dog's fur, and they're the inspiration for Velcro. It's easy to tell these ones apart because these obviously have the burrs. They come up with these nice purple flowery thistles, and the leaves are enormous, much bigger. These leaves actually you could wrap fish in. So dock and burdock, 2 different plants entirely. The reason I use dock is for the seeds, because dock is part of the buckwheat family. So you can grind the seeds and use it as a flour. And because of the gorgeous color that it provides, the first time I ever used it was in this chocolate cake. The one thing I will tell you about this flour, if there are bakers out there who've worked with hard flours, this is a flour that needs a lot of moisture. So you will need to increase the liquid component of any recipe, and you'll want to let it sit for a little bit longer so that those grains can absorb the moisture. Otherwise, it can be really a nasty experience to bite into something and it literally just sort of dissolves into a thing of dust in your mouth. That's how dry this stuff can be. So if you do want to dry those things, very easy to, you go to the seed head, which is, as I said, here. Once it's dry and on the stalk, you can tell it'll be dry to the touch. And when you run your fingers down a stalk, you can literally just pull the seeds right off. I have a YouTube video of it, and I can share that with you in a link later on. Very easy to harvest those. And again, you can roast these in a, fairly low oven, about 350, just for about 20-30 minutes so that they don't burn. It gives you a nuttier flavor, and then you can grind it down and you can use it as a substituting flour. Again, you don't want to use all dock flour for any recipe. This is one that you would want to add in with some other flours and other ingredients. Goutweed is another bane of my existence. I don't want it in my yard, but it's in my yard. And so I just deal with it and I eat it. So the nice thing about goutweed is that it tastes like celery. So if you have very few people in your house or people who don't like celery, but you do, you can still get a bit of a celery hit without buying an enormous thing of celery and then half of it goes bad. So two general kinds of goutweed that you see in the local environment. You're going to see the bottom picture more often, that red and white, because that's a ground cover that you can find at a lot of nurseries. I would not recommend you use this as a ground cover. Again, it can spread fairly rapidly and your neighbors may not like you for that. The upper photograph is the actual variety. This hasn't been hybridized with anything else, or it hasn't been, it's not variegated leaf, it's all green. This is what I have in my backyard. I'm not so sure about the flavor of the white and the green. So I would be a little bit more hesitant to tell you to give that one a try than I would just the general green. So from my perspective, try this one, not that one, but I could, more research and a little bit more experimentation on my part will be needed. So when we're looking at goutweed, here's a nice big close-up of some of the leaves. So when they're young, one of the earlier slides I mentioned, I didn't mention it, but it was on the slide. When you're looking at young leaves, they will often be a different color, lighter, and they'll feel a little bit thinner and a little bit more tender. So this is not a trick of the light in this photograph. These leaves really are darker than this. So you can tell even by eye that this is the leaf that you want to eat, not that one. That one's getting a little bit old. This is the one you want to toss into your salad. Not all goutweed flowers all the time. Maybe mine doesn't flower just because I pick it so much and I don't let it go there. But this is what the flowers will look like. They're these tiny little florets that come up. So they grow directly out of the ground. They have the 3 leaves here, and they're almost kind of, like I said, almost an oval shape with those little sawtooth marks around them. Again, this is another good all-purpose green, great with chicken dishes. As I said, tastes like celery. A lot cheaper than celery too. Here's the real bane of a lot of our existence, and that's Japanese knotweed. The problem with Japanese knotweed is the size of it. This is a photograph of a knotweed stand that, thank God, is no longer in Hampton Park. This stand was probably a good 15 feet high. It was certainly double or triple my height. And the problem with Japanese knotweed is that it shades everything else out underneath. So unlike garlic mustard and goutweed that actually can coexist with some other plants, even though they're aggressive and they can spread, this plant will actively knock out anything that's around it. In this stand where it was actually some sumac, and sumac is a very hardy native species, very difficult to knock out, but Japanese knotweed did it. So this is a really easy one to recognize. It's also known as Japanese bamboo, so that gives you a real clue as to what it looks like and what the plant has. So if it looks like bamboo, you think maybe it's got hollow stalks? It's got hollow stalks. The stalk is hollow all the way up. And the leaves are enormous. They grow very, very large. They're oval and broad. They can go towards a heart shape, but they tend to be more oval. The flowers come up in the late summer, but that is not the primary way that they reproduce. They mainly reproduce by rhizomes beneath the soil. So even though you can cut it back when it's flowering and stop some of its growth, the best way to get rid of this if it's in your property is to dig it out. However, before you dig it out, you might want to nibble on it. So what you want to eat with the Japanese knotweed are the early shoots. So even now I am seeing the shoots come up, and when they're about 6 to 8 inches tall, that's when they would be ready for harvest. So the first thing you might see if you're really looking are these little red nubs. These are a little bit more long than some of the first ones that come up. When they first come up, they almost look like little nipples coming up out of the soil. That's exactly what they look like. They look kind of rude. And within days, they are going to look like this. So this plant tastes a lot like rhubarb. It's tart, so you can use it in savory or in sweet. This is the only edible part of the plant is the shoot. And so again, within, I would say, another 2 weeks, this is probably going to be gone. So if you do want to eat it, now's the time to get it. 6 to 8 inches at the height. And it is hollow all the way through. You're going to need to peel it. And that can be a little tricky. So as you can see below, this has been peeled. One thing that I've found is that if you bring this home, if you've gone out and picked it and you bring it home, it's harder to peel. If you can peel it in the field, it will be a lot easier. So sometimes I brought a little container of water and I will peel it right there and pop it in the water and bring it home. Keeps it fresh. It's much easier to peel. Half the time you're starting to peel down those stalks, and because they're hollow, they just collapse in on themselves, or you poke them and they're no good. And I mean, they're still good. You can still eat them, but they don't look as nice. So it can be a finicky plant to deal with. Now, there's no medical or dietary concerns with Japanese knotweed, but it can grow in polluted soil. So again, you need to be careful that you have a healthy source. It is, however, a very good source of vitamin C. So another good one. I use it mainly in baking. So I will toss it into cakes, usually an apple cake. Because it is so sour, I like to pair it off with something a bit sweeter. And so I have a recipe for this cake on my website if anyone is interested in that as well. But it's great in stir fries. I've frozen this. I've used it again in pesto. Almost nothing I haven't used in pesto. How are we all fixed? We're getting up onto about 8:30. So we're going to run through a few more of these. Lamb's quarters. A lot of people know this one too. And a lot of people have eaten this as well. Another good one, in your garden. It is found in your gardens, usually. Probably you may even have this one. It's found in wastelands, parks. It likes full sun, but it can do just as well in partial shade. The leaves tend to be more on the lighter side. They grow a little bit darker as they get older. And they're that nice diamond shape with sort of more uh, narrow lobes around. The ridges are not really pronounced, just slightly. And there's sometimes like, if you look at a lamb's quarter from far away, you'll see something almost like a waxy coating or a dust on it. And then you come up closer and there's sort of a little coating on it. And that's not harmful at all. When once you wash it, that'll be fine. But that's another way that you can identify it. And from this picture, you can just see the top of the little flower spike coming up. So we'll give you a little bit closer shot of that. Now, I haven't done any experimentation with the seeds off of the flower spike. There's some concern. A lot of these plants contain an acid called oxalic acid. Most vegetables do. So you don't want to be necessarily eating any of these plants in large quantities. But there has been some research that suggests there may be a problem with the seeds. I don't know enough about it yet to say one way or another whether the seeds would be edible. So I stick generally just with the leaves. And again, this makes just a nice nibble, add it to a salad. There are some lookalikes, and one that you might know is nettle leaf goosefoot. I always have trouble saying that one too. But there's no powdery coating on those leaves. And one way to make sure that it's nettle leaf and not lamb's quarters is crush a leaf. And depending on your age, you may have had horrible dentists who lied to you and said, oh, this tastes like mint. This disgusting toothpaste that I'm going to put in your mouth, it tastes like mint. It doesn't taste like mint. It's that gross minty smell that I get when I crush that leaf. It may be a bit different. Everybody's palate is slightly different, but it's an indicator that you do not have lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters don't smell when you crush them. Plantain is one of the most underrated plants I think I've ever come across. And we wander by it and we look at it and it's kind of boring looking and it's not a banana at all. It's not that kind of plantain. So it has a very highly varied habitat. Usually where you find dandelions, you'll often find plantain as well. It doesn't like a lot of shade. It does like open spaces. It can grow in healthy, polluted soil, doesn't seem to matter. It can, it's a very, very tough little plant. So again, it grows in a rosette pattern similar to the dandelion. And the leaves can really vary. It can be very, very small, right up to leaves that are, a foot or more in size. Oh, pardon me. But they are sort of egg-shaped, the leaves. So that's what you want to be sort of looking for in the shape. They also have several of those very pronounced veins through them. So there's usually about 6 or 7 really solid veins that you can see very easily through the plantain. They also have a long flower spike, and that's what this sort of looks like. I'll go back to the earlier one, because this one is coming up as it's green, and you can see that there. And they come up, and then they turn brown. So you can use the leaves, again, earlier is better for flavor, but the seeds are what you really want. And I'll tell you why, because plantain is the major ingredient in Metamucil. It's psyllium fiber. So both the seed and the chaff can be ground and used in dishes. You can add these as a little bit of extra fiber in your dish. It's a great plant to have. Lowers blood, your blood cholesterol, good for blood pressure. So there's a lot of medical information on plantain that has been done. It's a really great plant when you're out in the field too, because if you get a mosquito bite, even if you brush up against some poison ivy, this is a first medical plant that you might want to look for. Take a leaf, crush it up, mash it in your mouth if it's clean, spit it out, put the mash on the mosquito bite. It does help alleviate the itch. And it doesn't always work for poison ivy, but until you can get home and wash the area with cold water and soap, this can give you some relief. So there are some medicinal, there's a lot of medicinal properties in plantain. Research is coming out every day on this particular plant. I've also read old indigenous reports where the veins of the leaves, the string of the veins are so tough you can actually use it for fishing line. So it's an amazing little plant. Coming down to Purslane, another one that people don't like because it spreads all over the place, but my goodness, it's such a tasty little thing. So it's a perennial succulent and it grows in really, really thick mats along the ground. So it is a really great ground cover. Again, spreads pretty fast. And the leaves are very small and delicate and they almost look like little tongues, to me anyway. And if you pinch one with your fingers, they feel kind of spongy. If you've ever felt an aloe plant, it feels a little spongy, and that's the succulent. That's what succulents do, right? They have that sort of spongy character to them. Here's a nice close-up of the way they come up. So they come up right out of the ground, but they do grow in that sort of almost like a wheel and spoke pattern. And if you do remove the whole plant, it's pretty easy actually. You literally just go down into the middle of it and pull from there, and you can take the whole plant out. So sometimes the stalks, sometimes when they're very, very young, the stalk will look a little yellow. And the flowers also come up yellow, as you can see here. But then the nice thick stalk I cannot talk tonight, turns a bit more reddish. And the thing about, this is one of the few that you don't want to pick right first thing in the morning after the dew is evaporated. This is a plant that needs to sit in the sun for a couple of hours for the sugars to develop. So they actually taste so much better if you harvest these ones after noon, maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you have some of this on your property and you know you have healthy soil, give this a try. Do it tomorrow if it's a nice day. Go out, pick one, pop it in your mouth at 10. Not too good. Wait until the sun comes out, try it again, and you will notice a difference. One of the things I use it mostly for, other than just nibbling on, is in homemade body products, because it is a thickener. So you can use it in soups or sauces to thicken up. I use it, as I said, in body products. I add it to coconut oil and olive oils to make my own lotions. I've also used it in hair rinses. It's good for your hair. So you can just use the Purslane water. And you can drink that Purslane water as well. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not terribly tasty to necessarily drink. I prefer eating it. But there are a couple of things that you might get confused by with Purslane. Some of the spurges out there look similar. The bottom photograph here, as you can see, it comes up in that sort of that wheel and spoke pattern, similar to the Purslane. But one of the ones that you might come across is fairly, is this hairy stem spurge. And as you can see from this photograph, it has those little hairs on the stem as compared to the Purslane, which is completely hairless. And they also, the leaves of those spurges, they lack that sort of meaty texture. So that's another easy way to tell them apart. All right, we got about another half an hour. I'm going to quickly go through some last ones. So wild grape, we have these in abundance. And this is another one that you can probably pick with impunity, particularly if it's on your own property, because they climb, they will grow to the height of their environment. You go to any park, or if you drive along the Queensway, and you can see them covering spruce trees and maple trees. They will grow literally 20, 30, 40, 100 feet in the air. As far as they need to go, they will go. But 2 things of them are edible: the leaves and the fruit. So the leaves, as most of you probably know, grapevines have, or stuffed grape leaves in dolmades, very traditional. And of course, who doesn't like grape jelly? And who doesn't like wine? So the first thing when we're looking at grapes to identify them properly, because there are some plants that look a little bit alike, when we're looking at the wild grape, we want to take a look at the leaf first. So the leaves are fairly large and they, generally speaking, they look a bit like maple leaves. Oh, pardon me, I've just got to get my note back up here. The fruit is much different than the other ones. Some of the other vines that you're going to see, like Virginia creeper, they have larger berries than the Virginia creeper and some of the other ones. So the fruit will come up, as you can see, that green, the nice big leaves. The other thing that you will see on the wild grape, and unfortunately this photograph is not great, but where this red circle is, you will see those tendrils. And they wrap themselves around anything that they can get their paws on. So a fence, a tree, if I stood long enough, I'm sure that they would wrap their little tendrils around me too, but I'm not going to let them. So with grape leaves, the time to be harvesting those is in about a month and a half, around early June, when the new leaves come out. And most of the time you want to pick a leaf that's about the size of your hand. So you don't want to pick the small ones. You want to pick ones, if you're going to be rolling them up, if you've ever done dolmades, you don't want something that's too small. And an easy way to process these particular ones, some people blanch them. They go through all this blanching and processing of the leaves to break down the fibers to make them easier to roll and to cook. If you've got the time, pack them flat in a plastic bag, toss them in the freezer and for a couple of weeks, and just freezing them will break the fibers down, and then you can use them immediately in any recipe. You're going to want to wait until the fruit obviously is that nice purple color before you pick it, and you can pick this in the wintertime. We've all heard of ice wine. That's when grape growers allow the grapes to freeze on the vine before they pick them. If you pick grapes when they're frozen, they're very, very seedy. When they're not frozen, they have all those little seeds in them. But once they're frozen, you could crunch those seeds and eat them. The seeds won't hurt you anyway, even if you're eating them when they're not frozen, but they're a lot easier to take when they're frozen. But to make the grape jelly, you basically just need to mash them out. So what I do when I'm collecting my fruit in late August and through September is I throw it all in the freezer. And then when I'm ready to make jelly or juice, I just simply bring them all out. I toss them into a colander and I let the juice flow out. And then I use, the fruit to make the jelly and the juice to make either wine, or I just drink it. Now, as I said, these things can be a bit of a problem on our landscape because they can kill trees. Here's a few examples. This lovely little specimen in Hampton Park, this blue spruce, is now safe, and it has had its grapevines removed thanks to a few volunteers and the city of Ottawa for getting that off. But they can be a real problem. So again, a good one to eat. There are some lookalikes, as I said. Canada moonseed has very similar leaves, but the vine has absolutely no tendrils. So they don't have those little wiry tendrils that wrap around like the grapevine does. Porcelain berry, I don't see this as much, but the fruit has those sort of the tinier seeds, and oops, pardon me, and the leaves look a little bit different as well. Virginia creeper, you'll find a lot alongside wild grape. And again, this is easy to identify. Virginia creeper has 5 leaves. It almost looks like a palm leaf, like that. And the fruit is quite different. It comes down on these little red stems, and it's much, much smaller. Wood sorrel. I love this stuff because you don't really need much of it, and it's just lovely to nibble on. It's very, very common, and it is not, pardon me, it gets confused with clover all the time. So it looks like a shamrock. So on behalf of my Irish ancestors, I'm sorry for any confusion we may have caused.
Sharon. Oh, Sharon.
Yes. Yes?
You froze out there, so just revise what you were talking about on the common wood sorrel.
All right, I'll just start again. So wood sorrel. Wood sorrel is often confused with clover because this is the one that looks like the shamrock, not the clover, right? So let me just bring up the next one. We've got a side-by-side picture. So clover on the right has the 3 leaves, different shape. Sorrel on the left. We'll go back to the original one so you can see the leaf a bit better. And these, I mean, it's a heart-shaped leaf. You can't miss it. And this, everybody thinks that, you know, some people think this tastes sour. I taste lemon. Every time I eat a leaf or a flower, this is what I taste, is I taste lemon. So this is a lovely substitute. I use the flowers for tea. I've made it into simple syrups, use it for cocktails, just an all-around nice little plant to have, and just a nice flavor in a salad too. Gives that little extra little lemony kick. I won't spend too much time on crab apples because there aren't a lot of native species. There's only one native crab apple in Ontario, but there are tons and tons of species that you can choose from. And Ottawa is just awash in apple trees. So most people who have apple trees on their property are more than happy to let you pick a few. Lots of places to choose from, lots of different apples to choose from. If you are interested particularly in harvesting fruits and nuts, because we also have, say, a lot of black walnuts in Ottawa, there's a great group called Hidden Harvest, and they get groups together to collectively harvest these fruits and the nuts. And so they have agreements with public and private landowners to do this. And so a portion of the whatever they harvest goes to the landowner if they want it, a portion to the volunteers, and a portion to the food bank. And when it comes to apples, it's really good to go with them because they have the right equipment. You need sometimes pickers, you need ladders. They're a really good group to get in touch with for those kinds of fruits and vegetables, or fruits and nuts, pardon me. Raspberries though, I mean, there's lots of raspberry bushes around. The one thing you'll notice about the wild raspberries is they're tiny. They're small in comparison to the big fat ones that we find in the grocery store. But you can use the leaves as well. You can have the leaves for tea. And the leaves are very high in vitamin and iron and potassium and a lot of the B vitamins. So they're often used in women's health issues, particularly for menstruation and menopause. Very good for those kinds of things. So if if that's of interest, that's something where you might want to do a little bit more homework. Other raspberry plants that you might see around are the purple fragrant raspberry. And you can see that the leaves here are, again, sort of maple leaf shaped, but this is the real indicator of the purple fragrant raspberry, and it's the different fruit. It's a little flatter, and the berries do not taste very good. So I wouldn't even bother with that one. Staghorn sumac, again, real easy one to identify. This is the major characteristic that you're looking for, and you can see the old heads even now. So they come up in these big, they're called I call them flower heads, but they're actually berries. These are all individual tiny little berries in these big clusters. The other way to identify it is those nice long lance-shaped leaves, usually, sort of a nice dark green. And if you rub the branches right near at the tips of where those clusters are coming out, they're furry. So they're named for the velvet on a stag's, on a deer's horns, a stag's horns. They can form in very, very tall and very dense thickets. And the only thing that you can eat on this one are those berry heads. So the one thing about these things is you can't get them hot, you can't get them wet until you're ready to use them because the flavor is all on the outside. So you need to capture that first. So you can't wash these. So you really do need to have a very, very clean source of sumac if you're going to do juice, or it can also be dried as a spice. Again, I have some videos where we can show you, how you can harvest them. It's pretty easy. You cut off a couple of heads, And what I do is I rub them together vigorously over a bowl, and all the little berries fall down. You pop those into a blender with some water, whiz it up, strain it. May need to strain it twice because there's a lot of little hairs on there. But when you do, you get this color of juice. And it is a substitute for lemon again. So anytime you need lemon juice and you don't happen to have it, but maybe you have some sumac handy, that's where you go to is. I've even used it as a sumac meringue pie, which was very, very tasty. So those are the plants we've looked at today. And I would like to open it up to some questions. I have a few resources here, and we can give some time to Hampton-Iona as well. So this is some ways you can get in touch with Hampton-Iona or with Friends of Hampton Park or Friends of Carlington Hill. And other than the resources that I included in the guide, here's just a few more. I would really encourage you, try and take in an episode or two of Moose Meat and Marmalade. You will not be disappointed. It's very entertaining. It's based in Canada. I've been to some of the places that they've shot episodes in, and it gives you some really good ideas of some other foraged foods you can find. So I know we're coming up to 9 o'clock. I promised time, so I'm going to open it up to questions now. So I'm just going to shut up and see what you guys have to say. So Erica, have we been getting anything in?
Yeah, we've had a few questions along the way. And I think because you just finished off there with the sumac, I'll just start with that one because it's the last question that came up.
Okay.
And it was in regards to the tannins of sumac. Are there any cautionary approaches for the tannins?
You mean getting the tannins out?
Yeah.
Good question. The only thing is if probably soaking would do it, because this is what you have to do with sumac juice, right? You need to let this stuff steep. So it's a good question. I do not have the answer for it. I will look it up and I will see if I can't find a good answer for that. So I'm sorry, I cannot give you an answer right now.
Well, I tell you what, I just asked Matt to unmute himself, and maybe he can better explain the question.
Perfect.
All right, have you unmuted, Matt?
We're asking him to unmute. Oh, no.
Okay, I guess he's. You should be able to speak, Matt. Okay. Anyways, we'll move on.
Okay.
Yeah. So can we just go back to garlic mustard?
Yes,
for a minute.
Yeah.
There were questions about garlic mustard. What's the best part to eat?
Okay.
And is it from the first to or the second year? Like, which is the best?
Yep.
Yeah. And is it best to cook it or eat it raw?
Right. Okay. Pardon me. It was garlic mustard I was going back to. Yeah. Garlic mustard, you can eat the leaves first or second year. The first year plant is probably going to be tastier. So they're the younger leaves, they're coming up straight out of the ground. The older stands, you'll notice they are larger. So you can eat first or second, and you can eat the leaf and you can eat the seed pod. So that little seed pod here can be ground, and you can eat that raw or cooked. Does that answer that question, or do we need a bit more info on that one? I can grab some more info.
No, I think you answered the three parts that I noted from the question. And can I just take you right back? Sorry, we're gonna have to jump around, but back to the sumac, because my Matt's mic is not working.
Okay.
So yeah, is it possible to drink too much of the sumac tea or the sumac juice or the lemon juice?
Oh, the sumac juice. Well, okay. I mean, I've never drank, you know, an entire quart of it or a gallon of it in one sitting. I usually, you know, I don't think so. It would be, you know, you wouldn't be drinking a gallon of lemonade, I don't think. Again, let me see about quantities. I've never heard of any real problem with drinking, you know, like a cup of this, say, a day or something. It is very high in vitamin C, and it's got, I know, some antibacterial properties and anti-inflammatory properties as well. Because I have had some anecdotal evidence that from a woman that I know very well who was having tooth surgery, and she drank some of my sumac juice and the swelling went down. So that had probably a lot to do with the vitamin C in it. But I will double check on those tannins, Matt, and I'll see if I can't find an answer for you.
Okay, thanks. So I had another question during your presentation about stinging nettle.
Okay, yes. One of the,
how do you use it? And do you have recommendations of when to harvest?
Yeah. Okay.
Stinging nettle.
Yeah, stinging nettle is another good one. Another good sort of all-purpose, you know, leafy green. Again, you can crush those leaves to get some of the prickles off. But again, I haven't used a lot of stinging nettle as a food. I've used stinging nettle for some preparations. I've seen it for some medical preparations. And weirdly enough, I've used it mainly as a compost accelerator. It is very good for accelerating your compost. So I don't have as much experience with stinging nettles, other than, you know, like I've had the tea, and I know it definitely is edible. But again, I can get you some more information on that. There are some nettles they're not stinging nettles, but I know where you can find some nettles you can take a closer look at in Hampton Park as well. There's some found along the culvert area. But I don't think they're stinging nettles. Good question. Put that on my list too.
Okay, and then we've got, as far as I know, there's one last question here that I don't think you covered. Are there issues with other sumac trees that may be poisonous?
Yeah, there's poison sumac, but it doesn't look anything like staghorn sumac. That's why I didn't even bother including any of those other sumacs, because there's no other plant that has that identifying flower head. So, and that's the only edible part of the plant. So even if you had a different sumac, you wouldn't have that flower head. So there is poison sumac. There's like a white sumac that has more of a sort of almost like a yellowish head. It doesn't look the same at all. So there is absolutely, but if you are allergic to sumac, if you have a real sensitivity to other sumacs, to a poison sumac, this might be one you don't want to try, or you might want to be really, really careful with this one. Again, if you have allergies to certain plants, if it's in the same family, you might have a trouble. And that's why you really do need to do your homework on something like that. So yeah, if you're sensitive to sumacs in general, this one you may want to take a pass on.
Okay, thanks. That's all I see from the chat perspective for questions. Mm-hmm. If I missed anybody, you can raise your hand now, I think.
Okay. Well, and Lauren, I think Lauren or Eileen, if you would like to chat about Hampton Park, this is an opportune time to do a little plug for the AGM.
Oh,
I'm here.
Yeah.
If Eileen wants to jump in. First of all, I want to acknowledge Eileen, who is our vice president and our gardener in residence. So Eileen is the person who has brought Hampton-Iona Community Group into the world of gardening and forestry, and works most closely with Sharon. So these are new areas for us in the last few years, and we're very excited to be working in Hampton Park. Much of our focus historically has been on Iona Park because it's our recreational center, but Hampton Park is definitely a treasure that few communities in Ottawa have, and we thank Sharon for all the work she's trying to do to restore it. The Hampton-Iona Community Group, we're involved very much in our parks. We run recreational programs. We deal with neighborhood development. Currently, some of the issues around infill and particularly loss of trees is one that I know is dear to Sharon's heart with respect to infill. But we're always looking for more volunteers to help out. Currently, anybody who lives within the boundaries of Hampton-Iona, and I put up a note in the chat with the boundaries, is considered a member. At some point that will change to people have to actively become members, but anybody in the area is a member. You don't have to live in the area to become involved with our community group. We're, as I said, always looking for volunteers to help with our activities or to join our board. We will be having our AGM in June, and perhaps Eileen can remind me of the date that we have tentatively selected. I think it was June 7th.
17th or 18th.
17th or 18th. So we haven't finalized that yet, but it'll be mid-June. The AGM will be virtual, so it'll be on Zoom, similar to tonight's seminar. I don't know if anybody has any questions about the community. We are hoping to get a few more board members or people to join our board this year. I suspect one or two will be dropping off. We're, I think, quite a collegial group. I mean, Sharon can attest to how easy we are to work with.
Yes. Fabulous. Very easy.
We are planning a number of events this year around events like this. We had applied for a grant from the TD Parks people. Unfortunately, we didn't get it, but our events are still going to go ahead. The three that we are currently looking at were, the first one was tonight's event with Sharon on the urban foraging. The second event will be in June, and we're hoping to start to do some planting in the hydro right-of-way that we have. So creating a pollinator garden. That event, we will have to see how that transpires given COVID limitations on how many people can come out and work and the resources that we'll have, but that will be a constantly moving target given the pandemic issues. And then in the fall, we were looking at doing a walk through our third park, which is the Byron Linear Park. And that will be led by Dave Alston, who will talk about the historic nature of the park and I guess probably the surrounding streets. Dave is a treasure in our neighborhood. He actually lives in the West Wellington area, but if you get the Kitchissippi Times, you know how much he knows about the area from an historic point of view. Mm-hmm. As always, Eileen will be heading up our horticultural activities in Iona Park. We've created quite a nice garden over the last couple of years around the building area and hope to continue that, and perhaps trying to enhance our pollinator plants in the area. Eileen knows most about that program. But as I said, we do other things other than just gardening. I don't know if Eileen wants to say a few words.
Ron, I think you've covered it very, very nicely. And all we need now is some sunshine and some helping hands, and we're ready to go.
And April snow showers.
Well,
you can see on the slide that Sharon has up now, there is contact information for the community group. So you can contact us through that. If you're not signed up for our newsletter and mailings, if you go to our website, you can sign up. And then as we put things up on the website, we usually mail them out as well. So you'll start to get information from the community group, including as we finalize these programs and the AGM in June.
Okay, great.
So, thank you.
And thank you very much, Sharon. That was just an amazing presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. I noticed one question that I didn't answer in the chat, and that was about distance from roads. I think somebody asked, you know, if there's a sort of a guideline for a distance from a busy road. It is kind of a judgment call. I mean, wide roads, if you're really close, I would say 25 feet is, you know, like minimum back from a road. Again, it's sort of a judgment call. You may have a windbreak, you may have a tree break in that's offering a little bit more protection from stuff flying in. Generally speaking, the further away from a busy road, the better.
What about a side street?
Side streets, again, you know, it's tough to say without knowing your land. And it's another good reason to get to know your neighbors. If you're new to an area and you don't know what may have been on that property before, ask, because things change very, very quickly, as we know in the city. You know, things change very, very quickly. And before you know it, someplace, I've lost foraging places within 5 years. You know, I would find one and then it would go, something would be developed on it, or something would contaminate that area that I knew about. And it's just like, well, that's another one gone. I got to find another spot, or I've got to expand my garden. So. All right, well, if there's no other questions, do we have any other questions or anything that people want to talk about when it comes to foraging? Or if not, I think we can maybe even let you out a few minutes early.
Well, that was fabulous, Sharon. Thank you so much. I think there were a lot of good comments in the chat, and thanking you. So we just have another one that popped up here. Yeah, thanking you for the great presentation. Found it very informative, knowledgeable, and what excellent dedication you have.
Well, thank you. If anybody is particularly interested in mushrooms, I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be one. I'm getting there. You know, I'm getting better at mushrooms. But if you are interested in mushrooms, Learn Your Land, which is the YouTube series that is up there now, great place to start. And again, Hampton Park is a wonderful place to start identifying mushrooms. There's just so many coming up, especially later on in the year. So I'm really hoping we might be able to actually get a mushroomer and maybe do a webinar for you guys later on this year as well. All right, well, I think that's it for questions. And I want to thank everybody again for sharing their Earth Day with me and with us. And I hope you've at least had one little eureka moment tonight, and that you've learned something, and that you'll all be healthy and going out and eating your berries and your greens. All right. Happy Earth Day, all.
Thank you for the presentation.